Howdy y'all, I'm going to be walking you through how I made this design and turned it into a lino print. Here is the Clip Studio Paint time-lapse video. If you want to see the full screen recording of drawing this illustration, there'll be a link that should be popping up right now as well as in the description. This was a design that I was inspired by while watching this video of a person talking about earwig wings, and they had described them briefly as little angels or like bug angels, and that kind of just gave me the idea to do a piece like this to show off their beautiful wings. And here you can see I'm doing like a black and white test, or I'm trying to mimic the lino print appearance for the final bit of it. There they are. Now let's get into carving. Before we can carve, we need to somehow transfer the design from the digital to the physical. And if you guys want, let me know. I'll make a full video on how I did this. But to give you the short gist, I printed it out on just normal printer paper. I cut off the excess paper. I then laid down Mod Podge onto the surface I'm going to be carving and put the printed image print side down so it is directly in contact with the Mod Podge and the surface I'll be carving. This effectively flips your image for you, so you don't need to print it flipped. And then after that, I put a little bit of parchment paper on top of it, and then I put something really heavy on top of it. And I let that sit for like 12 to 24 hours. You probably don't need to do that long, but I haven't tested what the shorter end of that time frame may be. 6 hours might even be plenty. I'm not sure. Anyways, after that is done drying, you have to remove the paper somehow, and this is a little bit of a more tedious part, but it's not that bad. Pretty much all you got to do is just dampen the paper like this, and just rub your finger on it in a little circular motion. You could do this with a towel too. I find I have a better result using my fingers with this. And then I like to stain my block. For this I just use just typical acrylic paint. I believe this is Liquitex brand if you really want to get specific, but anything will work. Any acrylic paint will work. Just get it a little wet, water-based acrylic paint, and then you'll just put on a thin layer on top of this. Just a nice thin layer that's nice and dark. I'd really recommend it like a color that is contrasting to the board you'll be carving. I like to use red. Blue would probably also work well too. I have used green, and that was hard to see, so I'm sticking with red because it's pretty clear to see. In contrast to the board, it goes on nicely, and you can still see through it quite well. Now we will go into carving. Now, I didn't record a whole lot of the carving process because I don't have like good lighting. I don't have really any of that, and I even prefer to actually sit in front of my computer and watch like long videos while I'm doing this, because this, as you can tell, this is normal speed right now. This is a quite slow process, especially when you're trying to be really careful. You don't want the blade to slip and cut part of the illustration that you weren't meaning to. So yeah, quite exciting. Let's speed this up. So here it is, sped up about 800% normal speed, and it's just, you just gotta be slow and take your time with this, as it's quite difficult to fix a mistake with this. I know I had a few, and most of them are pretty small, and you just won't see it, but it'll just be part of the final piece, honestly. Now here I am being a little dumb about cutting this. Now there's no reason for me to carve the whole board when the design only takes up a portion of it. So I'm trying to cut away the excess to save for future projects because these are big enough I could easily carve things on them. However, I thought I would need a knife to do this, and all my knives are dull. So here I am finally realizing, hey, what if I try scissors? So I tried it on a little corner, and it worked beautifully. So much easier than the knife. And this is literally just a pair of like craft scissors. It's nothing fancy. Like they were probably like $3. And so yeah, it was a big revelation. Like, whoa, I can cut this so much easier with scissors and so much safer. My God, the knives were not safe and were not cutting well. I'm sure even if they were sharp, it would not have been a good cut. And later too, I do end up trimming down this even further as I go, like right before I print, and then once I've done some test prints, I end up trimming it down a little bit further just to avoid reduce the likelihood of like inking spots I did not mean to ink and ending up with some chatter that I did not want in the final print. So here we go back to some more carving. Yeah, mostly I always like to start with the outline because it feels like it's a good like warm up to the whole process, especially since I can go a good bit between carving. So starting with the outside, it's like low risk kind of warm up to just kind of remember how to do this and just get back in the flow of things. One weird kind of note is I honestly recommend starting with a smaller blade. I'm just using the SpeedBall carving kit. I'm not a big fan of it, but it works well. You may want to jump like right away to the biggest blade because it's like, here, I'm just carving the outline. It's just a lot of excess I need to remove. But I've found, at least with these blades, that jumping to like the big blades first when carving, you're way more likely to end up with your blade slipping and cutting parts that you didn't want to cut. So I prefer to start with either the smallest or the second smallest when I'm doing the outline, just so that I have better control over what I'm cutting. Here we can see the end of basically what I had for video of carving, but here's just like some in-progress photos I took while I was working on it. And this took quite a few hours spent over multiple days to carve this whole thing. Here it is cleaned up. Now we get to go into printing. The first printing's always real exciting. But it's also quite messy because there's going to be a lot of fixing you're going to have to do, but it's always so exciting to see like the first roll on and then it's like, wow, there it is, there's the design. And this is a pretty big block. Don't quite remember the dimensions off the top of my head, but I believe it's about 8 inches by 10 inches. It might be 8 by 9, 9.5, I don't quite remember. But it's quite big. It's the biggest one I've done so far, and my brayer is honestly pretty small for it, so it takes a lot of go-overs to really make sure it's coated right. I'm just using some oil-based paint. Here we go onto paper. I believe this is Bristol. A bit thicker than I'd like to use, but just what I have on hand that's of this size. And you can see this is sped up about 500%. I'm spending quite a while making sure everything's coated nicely. Taking a little peek. Looks like it's good, so here we go. No satisfying peel on this one because Bristol's a very stiff paper, so it just comes right off. But there it is. That's really nice and clean. There's still like some chatter that I didn't want in there, so I'm gonna take some revisions. Here's another test after some cleanup. Look at that. Still a little bit more chatter. I taped 2 pieces of paper together to get it to be the right size for this. That's why there's like that seam in the middle. But hey, it works. I can see kind of where the trouble issues are, or trouble areas are. So here we go, another print after a little bit more cleanup. Looking pretty good. There's a few trouble areas around the edge here where it looks like I didn't quite clean it as much as I should have, especially around the wing. Here I can actually see that I didn't apply enough pressure on the edge of the wing, so it just didn't fully transfer. Here we go, cleaning up just some of those chatter lines I don't want, that I didn't trim down all the way. Chatter lines are like iconic with lino blocks, and you both love them and hate them because they get in your way, but they also really show you that like this was handmade. So here we go. I've cleaned it up. We're on to the final print now on some nicer paper. This is a little bit thinner paper. Actually, it's quite a bit thinner paper. So you can actually like see it through. And here we go. This one will be a satisfying pull. Look at that. So clean. So nice. Came through so nicely. Now that that's all done, let's make some patches. Printing on fabric is a little bit, it's definitely different than paper. Especially the ink I'm just using SpeedBall's fabric ink. A lot of people say it's not great, but I find it's fine. It does dry pretty fast, especially doing a print this large. I basically had to add more ink to my glass pretty much every print. One thing I find really helpful with fabric prints and any print in general is to do a quick one or two just like priming prints, where I ink up the block completely, and I'll just use like some garbagey piece of paper like newspaper and do one or two prints on it to make sure that the block is nice and primed. So like here we go. I'm just priming it here. And I did a second one of these too, I just didn't record it. And this just helps make sure that your block is all ready and you're not going to have a whole lot of like underprinting, especially with fabric, because fabric just needs extra ink. Starting with white ink on black, and this process would honestly be way easier if I had a nice roller press, but those are quite expensive. Used, they're like $600. Brand new, they're at least like $1,000. So I'll just keep using a spoon for a while. It worked quite nicely. It just takes a good bit of extra grease, and I just have to really make sure I pay attention to those edges, especially the wings. I noticed they did not always like to transfer well, and that's probably due to a little bit of warping. And here we go. Look at that. Look at that. I was honestly in awe when I pulled this. It was like, wow. So nice. And here we go, we'll do a black on white, black ink on white. Look at that. Now one thing with patches is I do like to include at least like an extra inch and a half around the print, so that whoever ends up with the patch, they have enough room to either fold the edges in underneath before they sew it on, so that they don't have to worry about the edges de-threading over time, or if they want to trim it to a different shape or size before they sew it on. There's extra room for a lot of that. But here we go. Here's the final product. Thank you for sticking around and watching this.